Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth and marketing with business owners, thought leaders and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Hi everyone and welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Today I'm speaking with Fred Banks from Banks Lawyers around the topic why a small legal firm can give big service. Fred, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
How's your day been?
Yes, not too bad. It's the weather's fine. It's we're in Queensland, so it can't be too bad.
Yeah, no, we're nearly. Well, it's not. Spring is 1st September. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. We don't really have the four seasons here, so yeah.
No, not really. But outside of general weather chit chat. For people who don't know you, just before we get into the nitty gritty of what we're going to talk about, could you just give everyone just a bit of an overview of like who you are, Banks Lawyers, bit of history, and sort of the services that you provide?
So I'm a solicitor, been in practice since 1993 in Queensland. Just practicing mainly in the area of personal injuries, and the firm itself started here in 2004, and we've basically been focusing in as a specialist personal injury law firm since that time. Probably not expanding out greatly, trying to give good service, but without having a huge overhead, so you can focus in on the client rather than being a huge business.
Yeah, sure. So you go, and that's obviously the tagline. Like we've utilised, somewhat, the actual tagline for your business, because it's obviously it's a key point around how you really do things, isn't it?
Yeah, well, in personal injuries, there's what most people would see is the huge law firms with their advertising. Some of them are listed on the stock exchange, and their method of operation is totally different to ours because they're much more of a large business structure which incorporates a lot of overheads and leads to a lot of extra costs and the usual difficulties you have with providing personal service from such huge businesses. And we're obviously the opposite end of the scale, providing that direct service to clients, one lawyer from start to finish, it's highly experienced. That's basically how we operate.
Sure, yeah. So you've got, you said you've been since 2004. How many, just out of interest, this is just leading into some other questions, I suppose, too. But just out of interest, over that sort of time, have you got some sort of idea of how many people you've been able to assist in that time?
I don't
have to be a lot. Have to be a lot, wouldn't it?
I don't have a specific number, but I'd say it'd be in the thousands. It's depending on obviously smaller to large claims. Some of them can take you a lot of time, a lot of effort. So you can only have a small number of claims in a particular year, depending on the size of them. But generally, you'd probably think somewhere in the thousands.
Sure, yeah. And are most of them certain sorts of claims? Because like as personal injury, I guess they would cover a range of different types of areas there too. But is there I guess types of injuries that are more commonly claimed against, or does it vary a lot?
Well, types of accidents is mainly motor vehicle accidents, just because in our state we have it's a large number of vehicles on the road, and the accidents rates tend to follow. So and everybody's insured through a compulsory insurance scheme. So that tends to be the type of work that we get generally, but it does flow on to all areas of law that relate to personal injuries, workplace accidents, slip and falls, product liability, and then you have aircraft accidents, boating accidents, really anything you could think of in that sphere. And then you go beyond that to what they call total and permanent disablement claims, where someone's got insurance through superannuation potentially for disability where they can't work anymore. So that's the extra area that's outside the normal accidents, because you don't need to have an accident to have a total and permanent disablement claim.
Sure. Yeah. So we've got so since you've actually been, I guess, working on that. Well, so when did you, after your studies, when did you actually start in this particular area? Was it straight into your business, or did you work, for somebody else before, like you started your own business?
Yes. So from 93 until 2004, I was working for other law firms, but mostly law firms that specialised in personal injuries also.
Right.
So that's obviously where I built up my experience and knowledge that I could then apply to my own business.
Was that, just out of interest, was actually some of that experience working in those firms at that time a little bit of the catalyst for starting your own business?
Yeah, it was actually, because I've worked in the big and small firms in the past, and I've seen the good and bad and the different way that people operate. So I've tried to just take the good and incorporate that into my own business, and make that something that makes the clients more comfortable and happy, and also makes me more comfortable with what I'm doing is the best possible service that I can give to the clients, but get the best possible results.
Yeah, sure. So is that like that choice too about moving into personal injury law when you, obviously way before you started your own business, because there's so many areas of law. Was there a specific reason why you went into that area?
Yeah, because it's sort of suited my mentality, I guess, because I'd always liked to help people, and it was a very personal type of law that you were doing the emotional part as well as the legal part, and that's sort of attracted me rather than the strict paperwork. Doing leases or contracts or something like that wouldn't engage me so much. So I always enjoy that part of helping people going through what usually is pretty difficult times with injuries, and trying to get them a positive outcome and help them get on with something in their lives, as against something that's more strictly paperwork.
Yeah, I guess it's an area that I've had, I suppose, some level of experience with family members in who've had accidents, but I've never really, I haven't had a great deal of then experience, I suppose, with what happens then with people where they have to deal also with, say, an insurance company and other entities, and then not having someone really on their side, like yourself. And I imagine, that for, I obviously don't know like the percentage of like how many people have a really good advocate for themselves, but like, I would imagine it's maybe not exactly the norm, because they have to deal with larger companies where they don't have a level of personal service. Would you say that that's a true thing to say?
Yeah, it's like in this type of law, it's actually comes down to the person that has your file is working for you as a solicitor or lawyer, and what they can provide to your particular claim. So what happens is if you have one lawyer through the whole process, it's a bit like having one doctor through your treatment. If you change doctors all the time and you have to retell your story and half the story gets told or understood and then half of it gets lost and then it gets moved on to someone else. So it never really works if you have multiple people helping you with your problem, which in this case, personal injuries claim. So that's unfortunately what does happen in these other types of businesses where they're more changing staff or changing file loads or whatever, whereas with us, we're just like the one person looks after you from start to finish. It really makes a huge difference, just even for frustration levels of clients, because as you probably know, changing doctors, for instance, telling your whole story is actually quite frustrating, stressful.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, like you could, yeah, I as you're saying that too. I mean, that's exact same scenario here as being handed over to different people happens across all sorts of industries. But then the level of frustration and I guess the level of like real world impact is then multiplied by a much bigger factor in your instance too, because it's okay, say, if you're with a huge big web design firm, like someone like us, but if we were some multi-tier kind of firm with heaps of people and you've got account managers, and I know that's the case because that's why, I mean, some people have come to us for the very same reason, essentially just to have more personalized service, but then you've got them in your instance, like the impact is so much greater of then, even just on the emotional level, I would imagine.
Yeah, and we, like, things don't happen overnight. Claims do take time, so you're always going to have that need to, have some kind of consistency in the person who you're dealing with over that time to get a decent result. And also just make your life easier as a client. So that's why our model, or the way that we operate, we do see a lot of clients satisfied with the services and the way that things are the outcomes are achieved.
What level of importance do you? This is probably like a leading question. It's really obvious maybe to people at this point in time listening to the podcast, but what level of importance do you then place just on that simple idea of actually of somebody of your client, just simply have somebody to talk to? I know that sounds like a really obvious thing, but it would be something that then generally doesn't happen, or not someone, but then the same person who, like you were saying before, they've already gone through the story, so and they're more emotionally invested in it, which for that person in a personal injury case, I would imagine, I mean, that's just would be, for me, thinking about it, one of the most important things.
Well, and the other thing about that's exactly right, but the other thing about that too is that this type of law, you have to have some kind of empathy, some level of empathy with people, and it's not the case for everybody that they have that. Particularly in the legal field, it can be quite dry, and some of the lawyers will not have that as an emotional side to their personality, that they interact with clients that way, and that can make it really difficult for people in this very emotional situation that they're in, where potentially they're injured, they can't work, they're looking for support, and if you're not a lawyer that can give them some kind of support from that point of view, it makes life really hard for them and for you, in doing your job. So we have had clients that come from those other types of firms that couldn't get through to them, that they weren't whingers, they weren't trouble, they were just upset and life was difficult, and could they get help? So it's a totally different way of thinking when you have, I think, that level of empathy with the client.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like, you can look at the same person, the same scenario, and there's nothing else has changed, but it's completely down to your perception. But I guess also, then, like you were saying, the type of person, but why that person, that lawyer, like yourself, or then somebody else gets into that field in the first place. Like, you get into it because you feel that it's important and you want to help people, and that's like a genuine reason for starting to do it. Or you get into it for another reason, and that's obviously going to impact, isn't it? Like, that's going to change your worldview on like how you do everything in your job. It has to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's still not detracting from, you're doing a good job, you're getting the law right, you're making sure that all the I's are dotted, but you're just doing it in a nicer way with the client and understanding their difficulties. Like, most of our clients are what I call your mums and dads type clients, so they're not sophisticated in that they don't have great experience of legal matters. Some of them never have even dealt with a lawyer, and they're not doing these claims because they want to. They're forced into doing them because they're injured. They have their conversation. This is the system that we're operating in. So you have to really treat people like that with kid gloves, and make life as easy as possible for them to get their outcomes.
Yeah, well, and I guess in many ways, in any business, if it was me, you, anybody, the ultimate, like, everyone wants to help people. That's generally good business anyway. Like, outside of being a especially empathetic person, or then generally everyone wants someone to be very good at what they do, and, like you're saying, to tick everything that needs to be done legally the right way. That's obviously, like, paramount in your case, but it's just those little things, like, they has little things count, and they do, they are really important. And then, especially in your instance, like, it can make all the world of difference to people's perception of the whole experience, can't it?
And I think the other thing too, Saul, is that with people that come to us, they recognise that this is, it's my business. The outcomes are important to me too, because I want to have a business that's, that can show success for people, because that's how, I get further work, and I also, give them some kind of value. Whereas if with other types of businesses where they do lots of advertising, they're sort of saying, well, that person, they were more of a commodity. So, we got the settlement, and then we got some money, and then we moved on. Whereas to me, they're not a commodity. They're obviously an individual, a person that I want to get a good result for, and make them satisfied that everything is done as best it can be, so that can create a goodwill for us.
Yeah, I guess there's from an advertising point of view, from somebody like, I guess, many people that always sees things like that advertised in a particular way, the general impression This is just me, the general impression, not having ever used any of those firms, but the general impression I get from advertising in that particular way is that the results that you're likely to get, or the message that I interpret that they're trying to present, is that it's going to be simple, straightforward, no fuss. We're good at what we do. It's that sort of idea, which I guess is the general appeal of when people are presenting their brand like that we're going to, or that we're like, how would you say, that we're like like a bulldog. We're going to do a hard job for you. But it's funny because then I guess the implied thing there is that if you don't talk that way, you wouldn't be doing a job in that same way. But it's not really true, of course, is that you can actually be doing a great job and work very hard for people and be empathetic as well.
Yeah, I think so. And you got to remember too, with in Queensland, there's some large compulsory insurance schemes. Motor vehicles one, work cover is the other. Plus, there's obviously your other private insurers. But the outcomes with those firms aren't based on the size of the firm they're facing. It's based on what evidence is being presented, and we have the access to exactly the same doctors and exactly the same barristers. We go through the same processes, so you don't get any advantage through being with a large entity in this type of work. It's not, you're not talking IBM in these situations. It's just you're hiring the legal knowledge of the person who's running your file, basically, and their skills. So that's why you're paying extra money for all the trappings of the, all the expensive buildings / staff / advertising, but you're not actually getting any extra quality in your result.
Yeah, and then there's that key word perception, then, isn't there? It's just a perception about what that advertising means, which is what I was saying. Is that's where advertising, why obviously various forms of advertising in certain ways, despite people's perception, if they were thinking about it and talking with their friends and family, people when they're analyzing, they'd get it. They'd be like, oh yeah, that's obviously, like, some people aren't silly, like they understand it's obviously a way to present things, but it still has appeal. It's like, I'm aware when I like a pair of shoes that I'm being sold to, but I still like the pair of shoes but I'm maybe even a little bit more aware because it's our industry. Like, I know when people use certain techniques, but I still choose to buy it. I still do it. So it still has that influence on your perception, and you go, well, therefore, even if you go, oh, I know it's probably this, but I'll still do it anyway because it feels like it'll probably work better, even though there's no real evidence. And that's where, then someone like yourself, when, it's still its own form of alternative advertising, is you're presenting, who you are as like a person who works in a different sort of way, but it still has great results for people. And and you've got then, you use a no-win, no-fee model too. Could you just sort of, like, I know that sounds obvious to people, but what does that actually mean for people when they utilize your services?
Basically, it just means that they pay at the end of the claim. So they come in, see us, sign the documents. We go through the claim. When a result comes in, get a settlement, some money comes in, that's when they pay. So it's obviously there's terms and conditions attached, but that's the basic part of what happens with what we do.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you also, as a part of us kind of speaking now, are you at sort of liberty to give any examples of cases that you'd like to sort of share?
Well, I suppose the thing that I always tell people is that we can do anything as far as injuries go, and the sort of examples of that is that the biggest case we ever did was a $7 million settlement that went through the courts, and it was actually at that point in time it was one of the biggest settlements ever in Queensland. And then the smallest case we've done might be a minor slip and fall for a few $1,000s, in a supermarket or something like that. So it's sort of I think that's probably one of the or two of the best sort of examples you can give, because people commodify. So they put us in a file and say, well, we're smalls, therefore we can only do certain types of cases.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's actually there's really nothing that we can't do when it comes to injury claims. We've had all the experience and knowledge, resources to handle anything.
Yeah, I mean that it's an interesting point. When you said before, it just sort of occurred to me just then as we were talking, when you were talking before about, say, in bigger firms, and there's like an individual who in whatever firm that actually handles the case, right? Just an individual person.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it doesn't, like, am I right? Am I right then in saying that if it's you or a bigger firm, there's still mainly just the one person that works on it, right?
Correct. Yeah. And that's in the bigger firms, they do have obviously more staff, and then different things can be shared around, but that's not necessarily saving the client any money or giving them a better result. It's just having more people work on the file.
Yeah, it's just really a side effect of having like a larger team, isn't it? Like it's not really like a extra benefit to anyone.
No. And the other side of that, of course, is if you send through your email to whoever was working on your file, but that person might have gone to something else. So then you might get an answer, or they might forward you on to someone else, and then you might never get a response that's suitable. Whereas with us, we'll just know the answer because we've been working on the whole time.
Yeah, that's right. So that's
for us to get the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously that's going to speed things up hugely too, and ultimately, like a part of obviously it's completely different, like for every case that you work on. But I would imagine there would be some cases that are more time sensitive. Is that right?
Yeah, there is. And all cases are time sensitive in that there's time limits that attach to personal injuries claims, generally, and some more that are even more shorter time frames than others. So that, you definitely have to be onto those issues and covering them off as part of your service to your client. And the other types of claims that I probably should mention to you too, Saul, is that we do or have done quite a lot of the ones where someone's lost a family member, particularly car accidents, and you end up doing a claim for the whole family because they've all had a loss psychologically, financially in that regard.
Yeah, so sure.
That's another part that we find that if you have a deal of empathy and you enjoy helping people, it makes a big difference because you sort of end up helping a whole family through a really difficult time, and it's helping them at least see some outcomes that might be useful to them in the future. Children that have lost parents and things of that nature.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, it's just absolutely. Yeah, I can't imagine you like really being any other way in your job. But it's obviously not the case. But just from my perspective, that would be, I mean, almost like a prerequisite, really. But
yeah, yeah. And
yeah, but
that's the other benefit of like the single person running all those or doing all that work together, because the whole family can have some single person to focus in all their legal questions, and the knowledge that you gain from the family in that situation helps you with each individual case to run it better, and keeps the costs makes the costs effective for because you're not replicating certain activities you've already done on one file and another file, because you can use it for both.
of course, yeah, yeah. So with the actual specific areas that you provide your services to, what states do you cover? Obviously in Queensland, but where else?
We've done we still do New South Wales matters, mostly for motor vehicles down there, and so we do a bit of cross-border work for people who've had car accidents, and also active for people down in Sydney. We did have one client who had a claim down in Melbourne, but she ended up living up here in Queensland. So, but that was more related to the institutional type cases.
Right. How soon, like if a person has had an accident, or a person's family member has had some sort of personal injury, how soon should they act on that, or get in contact with someone like yourself?
Well, we know it's always difficult, but we always say like immediately, and that's just because not so much you're making a claim. It's more to protect the client in relation to time limits, and also makes life easier with the insurers, because if you go to an insurer 9 months after the event, they'll just say, well, why didn't you come to us at the start? What's wrong? Why haven't you made the effort before now? So you actually think you might be doing the right thing by not bothering the insurer, but you're actually, making it worse in your dealings with them, because later on they'll say, well, you didn't come to us for 9 months, so therefore there was nothing wrong with you.
Right.
In the first place. And so you get that whole, it's a strange sort of scenario, because people always think, well, the nice thing to do is to wait, and then,
Yeah, I guess that is true. People would probably think that often, yeah.
And then if I feel really bad, well, I'll go and, do something about it. But it's actually safer and smarter to just lodge it straight away. And if things do work out okay and you're not too bad, well, then you can just resolve it for a small amount and move on. Or at that point, but at least you've done all the correct procedures to allow that to happen, and you've protected yourself if something is worse, and then you can get a result more quickly. So there's no sort of benefits to waiting.
Yeah, I guess is it true to say as well that then the earlier that people get in contact, the that level of having the right advice as soon as possible, I guess, is also a really important point. I mean, people don't know. I mean, most people don't know what they don't know, right?
Yeah. And it's sort of, it provides a sort of comfort to people, because they say, yep, I've asked that question, now I know the time limits and I'm going to take these steps or not, but at least they know where they're heading.
No, the lay of the land, yeah.
Yeah, and we don't charge anything if someone wants to get in contact with us and find out, but not proceed any further. Well, that's fine. We'll just let them know the time limits, and it's made life easier for them.
Yeah. Is there, being the legal profession, I would imagine a lot of people would then not do that in the first place, because they might feel like they're going to get whacked with a whole lot of fees, and then they hold off on it also because of that. Is that like I would, as a general impression, I mean, that's a bit of a broad brush to paint on like the legal profession as a whole, but say if people don't have a lot of experience, like if not any experience, like they've never had to do anything like this or hardly any other legal related things during their life themselves personally, all of a sudden they have to do it. If they've got an impression like that, I mean, that might be the impetus for them not to act quickly too.
Yeah, exactly. And but it does cost nothing if it doesn't inquiry, it doesn't go anywhere. It's no price. So that's something that shouldn't stop anyone coming to us.
Yeah, of course. So as we're coming towards the end of the podcast, I'll just get you, I guess, also Fred, to like we've covered a fair bit of stuff, but is there any other really good advice that you can think of for people in that particular circumstance that you would give people about anything really related to it that we haven't spoken about already?
Well, one of the main pieces of advice, which isn't necessarily to in any way assist me, but it does assist people in general, is to make sure they have insurance for what they call TPD, total permanent disablement, and potentially income protection, because that will cover them if they get into a situation where there is no insurance on the other side.
Sure.
Or if it's not, if there's not negligence, as they call it. And that's very important for anyone who's, wants to look after their life if something happens. So that's not something that any benefit to us. It's just a general observation. And then the other one that people should be very aware of is that with household, people that are brought in to do work in your house, you have to be really careful about the fact that you've got insurance for them. So, for instance, you might think your household insurance is covering you, but if they're deemed to be a casual employee, as someone who comes in and does cleaning, for instance,
right,
could be, then you should have your work cover insurance for them. I think it's called householders work cover insurance, and it's actually very cheap. But yeah, we have seen a few instances where people have not got that insurance, and that's really cost them a lot of money.
That's an interesting point. I would never have really thought that, but that's a real interesting point.
Yeah, basically anyone who has a house or a home that they bring in people to help them and pay them as casual employees, or they might think they're casual employees, but the law says they are, then you're running that risk that an injury happens and you'll be down a lot of money, whereas the household insurance might be, I don't know, $100 a year or $80 a year. It's great insurance to protect you on those sort of situations.
Even for so does that apply to contractors? Like you have somebody coming to do a bit of handyman work on your house?
This gets into the whole argument of whether they're casual employees or they're contractors, and often, and you as a consumer, as a householder, you may not know for sure when you bring them in, but the easiest way to protect yourself is just have the insurance, and then if something happens, you're fine. So
because we're not lawyers, obviously. We can't sort of sit in the court arguing that point.
Yeah. Because I remember that I was listening to one of the Queen's Counsel, the senior barristers, talk. He worked in personal injuries for years, particularly doing medical negligence. And he gave a talk to some doctors, and they kept on saying to him, "Oh, look, there's all these instances where it's not negligence. We shouldn't have to pay." And he said, "Look, you may be right, but make sure you got insurance.
Just in case.
Just have that backup. Yeah. So,
yeah, I guess that's the one like little sort of, I guess, insight that I've had for myself over the years. I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but the one thing that I've always found really fascinating is that the general impression of, maybe even with medical too, with like say medicine and law, there's that generally very broad impression of that things are kind of set in stone and that they're very, very clear cut. And I guess in many instances they are, but then there's these areas that are maybe you'd say they're evolving or they're grey areas, and there's an assumption that wouldn't really be the case because it's the law, so it would be very black and white, but it's not always really the case, is it?
Yeah, exactly, and these legislation can change too. So
right,
the law could say one thing, but then next week they change the legislation, so that's irrelevant. Yeah,
so the rules are changing all the time. Well, that's pretty interesting and really good advice too. Thanks, Fred. So with this point now too, I'll just actually get you to share with everyone a quote, a sort of a relevant quote or a quote that you like as well, and you'd like to share with everyone.
Well, it's actually one that my grandfather was a sea captain, and one of his sayings was that you lose 95% of your intelligence when you go to sea, which I take it to mean that when you're under stress, you're sort of surviving on a few, bits of information, knowledge that your brain sort of retained to try and get you through. And that's why it's sort of relevant to what we do too, because, you bring in the specialist lawyers and they can take all that stress away from you and make life a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, I think there are almost scenes. That's a fantastic quote. There's almost like a counter or sort of an alternative message there about being able to focus on things. So like a little bit, all the other stuff that we usually have to utilize to do different things, you just get rid of all that and you really, really focus on like the 5% that you really need.
Yeah, that's right.
And in order to ward off all the sea monsters and things like when you're at sea.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And your many years of experience.
Yeah.
Your sort of muscle memory.
Exactly. Yeah. Can you also, just as the once again, thanks so much, Fred, for being on the podcast. It's been fantastic. Could you let everyone know, as the very last thing we do, about the best way for people to learn more about you and Banks Lawyers and how to get in contact as well?
So you can obviously contact us if you go to our website, which is the bankslawyers.com.au. Then you could look at us on Facebook for Banks Lawyers. You'll find us there, and we've got contact details attached to that. Or just ring us. We just Google us, and you'll find us on Google. Give us a call or email from there. Thanks, Fred.
Thanks again. And so with that in mind, that's actually it for today, guys. Thanks so much for listening into our podcast yet again. Before we go, please leave your feedback as well as any suggestions, topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes. Thanks again for listening to the Grow Your Business podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Grow Your Business. Have a great day.